Good morning. I wanted to thank everyone who came last night to the Funny Money auction. We had so much fun. I think we made a little bit of money, Paul. Do you know how much?
A little bit.
Good answer.
The following is an essay written by Craig Wilson, formerly of USA Today. It's entitled The Kids Table and has to do with Thanksgiving, which, as we know, is right around the corner. I did not grow up in a large family, but when I was a kid, it was large enough that we all couldn't fit around the Thanksgiving table. So being the youngest, I was relegated to the children's table, along with my brother and my cousin, who were no happier being there with me than I was with them. My mother told me it was a special table, but I knew she was lying. If it was so special, she would have sat there. She didn't. I hated it being stuck over in the corner of the dining room next to the radiator. I should have known I was going to grow up to work at a newspaper. Even back then, I needed to know what was going on, and what was going on was at the big table, not at the kids' table. The chatter sounded so important, so interesting, so grown up. If my brother and cousin were talking about anything at the table, it was what they were going to do to me next. At the big table, meantime, the world's problems were being solved. So there I sat, looking at my uncle's back, hoping that someday I would graduate to the better dishes, the better conversation, the better location. As they say, location is everything. And for some reason, I knew that at a very young age. And then it happened. Uncle Fred had to die to clear the way, but there I was, one Thanksgiving afternoon, sitting with the big boys. The view was spectacular. I saw a gravy boat sailing on a sea of white linen. I saw flickering candles and butter on ice. I saw mountains of mashed potatoes in china bowls, and they were beautiful. So this is what being a grown-up is all about, I told myself. I had finally arrived, and what a letdown it was. How could the conversation that seemed so fascinating just a year before turn so deadly upon my arrival? But there they all were, talking about God knows what, the apple crop, Howard Miller's new snowplow attachment for his garden tractor, the new minister at church, whom no one was quite sure about yet. He drove a Buick, a little too flashy for a Methodist. All I remember is thinking I had waited a long time to get to this spot, only to find out the journey was for naught. I stayed at the grown-up table for years. It got no better, not that I didn't try to help things along. When I was in college, when I knew most everything there was to know and was very happy to share my knowledge, I even introduced new topics to the mix. God knows I was trying, but it became clear very quickly that polite conversation was not only appreciated, it was expected at the Thanksgiving table. We ate our peas and minded our cues. Then, a few years ago, the tables turned again. Cousins married and had children, and we were once again setting up a children's table over in the corner by the radiator. But it was in my dining room this time, and being the host of the family Thanksgiving dinner now, I volunteered to be at the kids' table again. To be honest, I like it there. It doesn't seem so bad this time around, and I certainly don't worry about what's being said at the grown-up table anymore. Been there, heard that. The conversation with my young dinner partners is lively, full of surprises, and moves along at a quick pace. My young relatives also are not abandoning me yet. They're still too young to be vying for a seat with the grown-ups. That will come in a few years when they start believing, as I once did, that bigger is better. As for me, I'm staying put. At my age, I know there are much worse corners of the world than those with a little table next to a warm radiator.
1 Kings 12, 1 through 17 and 25 through 29. Rehoboam went to Shechem, where all Israel had come to make him king. When Jeroboam, Nebat's son, heard the news, he returned from Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. The people sent and called for Jeroboam, who, along with the entire Israelite assembly, went and said to Rehoboam, "Your father made our workload very hard for us. If you will lessen the demands your father made of us and lighten the heavy workload he demanded from us, then we will serve you." He answered them, "Come back in 3 days." So the people left. King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon when he was alive. "What do you advise?" Rehoboam asked. "How should I respond to these people?" "If you will be a servant to this people by answering them and speaking good words today," they replied, "then they will be your servants forever." But Rehoboam ignored the advice the elders gave him and instead sought the counsel of the young advisors who had grown up with him and now served him. "What do you advise?" he asked them. "How should we respond to these people who have said to me, 'Lighten the workload your father demanded of us'?" The young people who had grown up with him said to him, "Thus shall you speak to this people who said to you, 'Your father made our workload heavy, lighten it for us.' Now this is what you should say to them. 'My baby finger is thicker than my father's entire waist, so my father made your workload heavy. I'll make it even heavier. If my father disciplined you with whips, I will do it with scorpions." Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, just as the king had specified when he said, "Come back to me in 3 days." The king then answered the people harshly. He ignored the elders' advice and instead followed the young people's advice. He said, "My father made your workload heavy, but I'll make it even heavier. My father disciplined you with whips, but I'll do it with scorpions." The king didn't listen to the people because this turn of events came from the Lord, so that he might keep the promise he delivered through Adad from Shiloh concerning Jeroboam, Nebat's son. When all Israel saw that the king wouldn't listen to them, the people answered the king, "Why should we care about David? We have no stake in Jesse's son. Go back to your homes, Israel. You better look after your own house now, David." Then the Israelites went back to their homes, and Rehoboam ruled over the Israelites who lived in the city of Judah. Jeroboam fortified Shechem at Mount Ephraim and lived there. From there he also fortified Penuel. Jeroboam thought to himself, "The kingdom is in danger of reverting to the house of David. If these people continue to sacrifice at the Lord's temple in Jerusalem, they will again become loyal to their master Rehoboam, Judah's king, and they will kill me so that they can return to Judah's king Rehoboam." So the king asked for advice and then made 2 gold calves. He said to the people, "It is too far for you to go all the way up to Jerusalem. Look, Israel, here are your gods who brought you out from the land of Egypt." He put 1 calf in Bethel and the other he placed in Dan. Here ends the reading.
Today is Stewardship Sunday, and perhaps you came expecting or dreading a take out your checkbooks kind of sermon. I've never liked those, nor do I know anyone who does. In fact, I do know folks who actually stay away from church on Stewardship Sunday, feeling that they've already heard it all, or they just don't want to be pressured. And I will tell you that I didn't set out to write a stewardship message this morning, and you'll be the judge if I did. And in thinking about why I don't feel comfortable delivering stewardship messages, I think I realized why, and it causes me to tell you a story. When I was a young teenager, my family did not go to church. We were New Age before it was new. But somehow my mother had heard about a charismatic speaker who was holding meetings in Los Angeles about an hour from our home. My mother, who was a psychic and read tarot cards for a living, I think she thought that this person had powers, whether they were psychic or clairvoyant or a faith healer or all of the above. So we went. And we were impressed the first time we went enough that we invited others. I invited some of my friends to come, and my mother invited her friends. And when we went to these meetings, we did see healings take place. I saw people get up out of wheelchairs and walk. I saw people's names called out where we didn't seem to think that there was a way that they would necessarily know our names. We weren't signing in or anything, but he might say, Joe Smith, and there would be a Joe Smith there, although it wouldn't be, that generic of a name. And that person would come forward and he would look at them and he would say, you have a cancer growing in you. And he would take an average tissue, Kleenex box, and he would bless that tissue and he would give it to that person and say, you must keep this with you, and this will protect you from the cancer that you have growing inside you. And he might lay hands on them and heal them. But he was a very charismatic person, and at the end of the services there would be not really an altar call, but more of a call to come and join their community. And we were in Southern California and they were in Northern California, so it was, come, get on the bus and come and join us, leave everything behind. And it was that kind of stirring thing that was going on. And I remember there was one day that I thought, I want to go. But I had a dog at home and I didn't want to leave the dog. So I didn't go, we didn't go, but eventually some of our friends that we had taken there did go and join the community. But at some point, maybe even more than a year later, we went again, and things had kind of changed a little. He had always kind of preached, be simple and don't have idols. And so like my friends who had joined no longer had their Beatles posters or their Monkees posters up because those were considered to be idols. And but yet this time that we went, they were selling Polaroid pictures of this charismatic leader. And it kind of started to seem to me, even as a young teenager, that maybe this power and attention that he was getting was going to his head. And then I remember one day my mother was called by a friend who my mother had recommended to go hear him. And she was crying because she was on a limited income, maybe even receiving public assistance at that time. And that when she was there, this charismatic leader had said, if you don't give all that you can, you won't be laughing by Valentine's Day. I think that's why I don't like stewardship messages. So we stopped going to hear him, but as I said, some of our friends had joined his group. And we stopped hearing and lost track of some of those friends as well, too, because they became more and more isolated. Until I was a sophomore in college on November 18th, 1978, when the massacre occurred at Jonestown. See, this charismatic leader was Jim Jones. And 5 of my friends died that day in Jonestown. Sometimes power can go to people's heads. Last week, we had an idyllic glimpse of King David and a united kingdom, in a moment where David danced before the Lord and the ark was brought in and God was again the center of the life of Israel. That moment is gone. We've moved along in the narrative of the whole Bible, and David was king for 40 years over all 12 tribes. Now David's son, King Solomon, was known for his wisdom. And things started out very well for the King Solomon, but then he began to worship the idols of some of his wives. I guess he had a lot of wives. And he drafted his own people and pretty much everyone else he could get his hands on to build a temple for God, even though it's called Solomon's Temple. Maybe his power went a little bit to his head too, as it can with powerful leaders. So Solomon expands the kingdom. He taxes the people and forces them into very hard labor. So what was just read was a story of Solomon's son, Rehoboam, and of Solomon's former advisor, Jeroboam. See, Jeroboam had supervised many of Solomon's building projects while Solomon was king, and he knew the people were unhappy with their forced labor, and he figured with his management skills that qualified him to be king until Solomon found out, and then Jeroboam had to skedaddle to Egypt, hiding there until Solomon's death. His name, Jeroboam, means he pleads the people's case. And Rehoboam, which means he enlarges the people, starts out inheriting the throne of his father, King Solomon. Now, Rehoboam is not a very wise leader. He's not a good shepherd. As we said, David wasn't necessarily a good shepherd. He was a shepherd, but Jesus was the good shepherd. Now, Rehoboam takes the advice of his younger buddies who don't have much experience in leading, and instead of those who are very experienced leaders, he ignores the counsel of the experienced elders. Rehoboam chooses the crude and horrific advice of making life harder on the people than even his father had done before him. Now, these are definitely stories of a crisis in leadership. These are stories of power, even God-given power, misused of Rehoboam by oppression rather than serving. Rehoboam is demeaning. He diminishes. He leads by domination, power that he has and holds over people. The people ask for lower taxes. They ask for less hardship, less oppression. And Rehoboam's buddies instead resort to a kind of bullying, a kind of immature, a kind of, the worst base of human nature. Now remember, in Mark's gospel, Jesus tells the disciples, you know that there are some rulers who show off their authority by lording it over others. But that's not the way it's supposed to be with the disciples, with us. Whoever wants to be great among you will be a servant, and whoever wants to be first will be a slave of all. because the Messiah didn't come to serve, but rather to serve and to give his life. Graciousness leads to graciousness. True and God-given power takes the form of serving, of caring, for easing the burdens of the oppressed. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later during our fellowship time in the forum, but worldwide, we produce more than 300 million tons of plastic each year, and half of that is disposable. So only 10 to 13% worldwide of plastic items are recycled, and the rest end up in our landfills and in our oceans. There are plastics in our seafood. They know that now, microplastics in our seafood, and toxins from plastics in our bloodstreams nowadays. Single-use plastics are a good thing gone bad. They just got to be used too much for greed, for people to make money. You will hear more about this in the forum, but we have the power to do something about this, and I believe we need to do something about this. In the days and weeks to come, folks will start walking the beaches looking for stranded sea turtles. These endangered species are washing up on our shores due to our changing climate. The northern waters seem to stay warmer longer, and so because there's good eating up there, the turtles will stay up there, but then what happens is the water gets cold quickly and they can't handle the cold water, and so loggerheads, Camp Ridleys, leatherbacks, and other endangered species of turtles end up swimming south later, and more often end up getting cold stunned, washing up on the shores of Cape Cod. Has anyone ever found a turtle? I know you have. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Our climate's changing, and waters are rising. We have issues because of all this. With Rehoboam's outrageous threats to increase taxes and oppress the kingdom, it split again. There was conflict. They took sides. Jeroboam becomes king of the north, but then he fears losing his power, so his power goes to his head a little bit, and he is, strategizing how he can keep his power. He uses the language of God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, but he distorts it. He uses it to manipulate the people to keep his power. He bows to their negative desires, and he says, here is the God that brought you out of Egypt, and creates two golden calves. Well, the golden calf God is not the one who brought them out of Egypt. He's trying to keep them from going to the other side. There's sin on both sides, but still God remains faithful to the people. So what does this all say to us today? First off, don't let your power go to your heads. Use it for good in service to others. We are not alone in confronting times of division, in times of differences of opinion. Questions about who's in charge, who has the power to make that decision. And there are differences between the outlooks of generations as well, too. More so than ever, with the threat of climate change looming over us, all generations need to work together for the sake of the generations to come. And kind of in a reverse from what happened with Rehoboam, we've been hearing from Greta Thunberg as a leader of the younger generation, speaking and inspiring so many regardless of their age. So I'm not thrilled with the dichotomy of, the young ones gave bad advice and the old ones gave good advice. It can come from any Bad advice can come from any age. Good advice can come from any age as well. Within the church, too, how do we listen and respond to the voices of different generations? The kingdom of Israel was divided when anxiety overwhelmed the people and the leaders were corrupted by power and prosperity. They turned from God to idolatry, to using their power for their own benefit, for their own pleasure. How can the body of Christ in our time find common ground except by turning to the proclamation of grace and servanthood? Together, we can serve by striving to be good stewards of our home here on earth, lowering our carbon footprint, considering electric cars, solar power, walking the beaches to save turtles, reducing, eliminating our use of single-use plastics, cleaning up our oceans, speaking out for those who are oppressed, serving the needs of the vulnerable, speaking out for fair wages, for access to health care, for affordable housing, which is an issue here on the Cape, fair immigration policies. Beware of leaders, religious or political, who let their power go to their heads. Do not let those in power continue to rule when it goes to their heads. We are called to have faith and to trust that God is still good, still true to the promise to make all things new, to renew all things, and still with us, calling us forward to an uncertain future. It's always uncertain, but we go forward in faith. Amen.